Now that we have seen in the previous video the layer 3 firewall rules and the inbound rules, what is the meaning of that and how to configure that with the cellular failovers and the layer 7, now let's see what are the forwarding rules. So again, I'm not going to explain specifically what is port forwarding. You can go and Google that. There is a good documentation as well in the documentation portal for Meraki. We're going to see how to configure. So now it says that the port forwarding, this is the KB that you can get for help. You can go there. There are no port forwarding rules, so we're going to do that. We're going to see where's the difference in the way to configure the port forwarding, the one-to-one NAT, and one-to-many NAT. So let's go straight into it. The port forwarding, you can add the port forwarding rule. So it's very simple. And let's say this is my first one. And you can select the uplink because probably in the MX you have one uplink or two uplinks. Then depending of each uplink, you probably or most likely you're going to have a different public IP address, right? Let's say that for high availability you have one ISP, another ISP. Two ISPs, it means the two different public IP address. So if it's port forwarding, probably your traffic or your client VPN or anything that you want to access to this MX will just go through one ISP. If it's that, you can just say internet one, and you know that that traffic is going through there. If you don't have any control of where that traffic is coming from, you have to put both. That's it. But you have to ensure that the other person who is trying to access to it has the two public IP address, just to put it out there. So that's basically it. First, the uplink, both internet 102. The protocol could be a TCP, UDP traffic. So you cannot make both. If you see, you have to select TCP and then probably create another one, say second, and then say both and UDP. If you have the TCP and UDP traffic. So that's how you should do it. The public port, it means what is the port that is going to be in the packet that is going to hit the MX. What is the destination port number that they're going to have? So let's play ball and let's say they have a web server, and the web server has the public port 80. It means that it's going to be a TCP traffic reaching out, let's say, from the internet, hitting the MX, the destination port, the 80. And then what you have to put is the LAN IP address. Let's assume again that it's a web server. It means that in my LAN side of the MX, in one of the VLANs, I have a web server. So let's say that my web server IP address is this one. So that's my LAN IP address inside of the LAN, inside of the MX. And the local port, what that means is probably what I'm advertising outside of my network is that you can hit me up on my web server in port 80, but that doesn't mean that I need to use port 80 in my web server. So if I configure my web server, say all the traffic that are going to hit me is going to be port 100, and I know that then I have to put port 100. So what the MAC is going to do is every traffic that is hitting the MX in the one interface is going to send it to the 10, 10, 10, 10 port 100. That's the difference between this one and this one. This is what the MX is going to see, or supposed to see in the one, and this is the translation of what the MX is going to make with the packet. Now the destination is not going to be the public IP address, it's going to be the LAN IP address with that port. Allow remote IP address, this is for security reasons. If you have a specific service, let's say this web server, but it's not, you don't want to be open for everyone because you know that there are malicious actors outside. So if you are testing or something or just providing to one specific people, you can put the remote IP addresses. So what that means is this should be the source IP address that the MX will see in that packet once it hits the one interface. So you have to know who is trying to access to your MX or to your web server through the MX. And then you can put here the allowed remote IP address. If you don't know, if you don't have a clue, just put any and that will work. In that way, you can save this and then it's going to have your TCP traffic in port 80. The MX is going to send it to 10, 10, 10, 10 in port 11, any traffic that is happening. So that's port forwarding. It means that you don't have to specify any public IP address because it's the public IP address that the MAX is managing or the one interface IP address that the MAX is managing. Here is different. Now we have one-to-one NAT. You can pause the video, you can read that and understand better what it is, and you have the KB as well. So if we want to add a one-to-one, what it means is it's just one-to-one ratio. I need to know what is the public IP address, and then I need to know what is the LAN IP address that the MX is going to translate that traffic to. So let's say this is going to be my web server, the same, but the difference is that I'm not going to use the public or the WAN interface IP address that I was using here, the ones that the MX is using. I'm going to have my own public IP address. Let's say that is 1.1.2, and that's the one that I managed thanks to my ISP. So the ISP says, this is your public IP address that you can use apart from the public IP address that you already have in the WAN interface of those uplinks. And then I would tell everyone, say, hey, buddies, if you want to reach out to my web server, use this public IP address, and everything that you send out to that public IP address, the MX will translate it to my LAN IP address, which is the web server that I already mentioned before, and the uplink. So here you don't see both. Why don't you see both the same as here? It's because a public IP address is going to be uniquely for each ISP that is going to be managed and give it out to you. So you cannot use this specific for everything. If you want to use it, you have to create a new one for the other IP address for the other ISP providers that gives you that IP address. So be there in mind. Remember where you are managing that public IP address. Let's say that was Internet 1. And the last one is allowed inbound connections. This time I can create it, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work. So the same situation that you have here, then you can come here. So what are the inbound connections that you're going to allow? I know that this is my translation, and that's what I did, just the translation. What about the connections? It's going to be TCP, UDP, ICMP, or anything. If it's the same situation here or the same service, it has to be TCP, but it depends on how you want to do that. But if we translate this one, you have TCP and then 480 and the remote IP address. In this case, we say anything, so anyone will go. So this is how you configure when you have an additional or an extra or unique public IP address that you want to translate to your internal service. So that's how you configure one-to-one NAT. From one to many, you can go back to the documentation, understand what is the main difference between them. We're going to configure it here. So you have a slightly different configuration, and it's kind of a combination between the two, right? Public IP address, it means one to many. At least you're going to need that public IP address. Let's say that you have public IP address, this one, and then the uplink, the same situation, one of the two, Internet 1. And what are the rules that you can have? Let's say description, again. Let's say that this is my web server. I always put this capital A. Web server, you can have it too, TCP or UDP. The public port, let's say that I mentioned to everyone that is port 80. My LAN IP address, this is going to be my Mr. web server. And the local port, I mentioned that it was 100. Allow remote IP address, you can put the specific public IP address of your remote users or remote access users, or just put anything. And that's how you configure the forwarding rule. In that way, if you use this one, it means that you have to give your pals or whoever wants to get access just the public IP address that you already own or you already managed in the one interface of the MX. And that would work for both this one, Internet 1, and Internet 2. So they have to hit that public IP address. If the traffic reaches the MX, it's going to forward it in port 11, port 100 to that web server. If that doesn't exist, and you have one-to-one, it means that you have a public IP address that your ISP provider is giving you. You have to ensure that you pick your ISP provider, and then the MX will translate anything that is coming to this, that's hitting that public IP address, is going to send it to that specific IP address. In this case, it's the web server. And then you can select what are the connections that you're going to allow. And we say that, well, it's a web server, so we're going to allow the port 80 and the protocol and anyone who wants to reach out. So if you want to allow more connections, you can add it. So you can have in this same host, you can have a web server, you have an Active Directory, you can have a DNS, whatever servers you want to have that you want to allow access from the internet, you can do it like this. If we remove this and say, no, I don't want a one-to-one, I don't want port forwarding, what I want is one-to-many NAT. Great. You still need to have a public IP address, And then after you get it, ensure that you know what is the ISP provider from that public IP address and create the rules. Like say, this is my web server, the TCP protocol, this is the port that I'm going to be hitting, and this is the LAN IP address of the server, and this is the port that I want to use. That doesn't mean that it always has to be different. Some people use 8080, that's great, but it's up to you. That's why you have that additional option for you that you don't have it in the one-to-one. And that's how you configure all the forwarding rules and the access for inbound traffic coming to your MX. See you in the next one.